From CKGI. I've been involved in community radio since, well, community media since the mid-90s. I started out in print. Actually, it was at my campus station, or at my campus when I was back at university, dropping off a press release on some advocacy work I was doing in oil spill recovery. And next thing I know, me and my friends are all on the board of directors for our campus newspaper, and we went on from there, and then it was community radio, and now it's more community radio. So there's been a lot of examples of professionals and amateurs working together in community media that I've seen personally and firsthand. I found that generally they work together quite well in every example. And I'll speak now on some examples of what I've seen. Professional musicians that support their community stations, even though the music they play may not be of the type that you would hear on that community station. And professional musicians will also undertake producing radio shows for their own enjoyment. You see that a lot on the West Coast, where I think people just play music on the air for fun. They play their friends. They play the kind of music they like to hear. That's quite common. Additionally, professional broadcasters or budding professional broadcasters or journalists or managers or musicians will participate with community media to build out their skill set. I've seen that firsthand on a number of occasions. The skills required are not that different between community and commercial media. The content will definitely vary. Commercial media likes to call community media hyper-local. Not really crazy about that term, but it'll do. Hyperlocal kind of describes what we do on Gabriola. We talk about issues and events that are totally local. The participants in those events are definitely, in many cases, professional musicians. Locally, when we established Radio Malaspina, that was a campus station, it was first managed by a professional broadcaster. Owen was a guy, was going to school, and he was a broadcaster since he was like 12. I think he was 18 at the time. He became the first manager. He was never a manager in a commercial setting, but he certainly was a capable manager, coming with the experience in commercial broadcasting. He brought that experience to community media and benefited it. He did it as a volunteer and then later on as a paid employee of the society. And there was never any conflict. There was never any confusion about what type of content we were going to play. It was just a matter of taking a skill set and applying it to a new setting. And additionally, the technical support person that helped establish the station at CHLY, Cam, he was certainly someone who went on into professional media. He now works for the commercial station, the Jimmy Pattison station out on the West Coast. He started as a technician at the university, volunteered at the radio station, and then went on to professional commercial broadcast work. Professionals are abundant in community media. They often participate for various reasons, often to further or promote themselves in this arena, which can be okay. When a musician hosts a show and they say their name, aren't they promoting themselves? But generally, isn't that the reason why we have community media, is for our cultural artists to promote themselves? So generally, that can be seen as a good thing. I found in my experience professional musicians will often serve or help out fundraising for community radio. We've had several Juno-nominated musicians that have done just that. They basically come to our fundraisers. In our case, we were spoiled rotten by our musicians. They would write music and premiere it at our fundraisers. So we really enjoyed having that. It created quite a buzz in the community. These were artists that people had known. These are sort of very good artists that premiered new music for our fundraisers. It did allow us to fund our station. Problems coming up. The delivery for community radio is different from commercial radio. The sound at a community station can be interrupted by commercial sounding programmers. Generally, when we train people, we ask them to use their own voice, not talk about the morning drive. And you often hear about that, and that can be a bit of a problem, especially when you have commercial programmers coming into a community setting. There's another concern. It comes with broadcasters or journalists that take the training for programming and will do a few shows, or after they've taken the training in community media, just go on to commercial work. Our sector is generally underfunded. We're a lot hand-to-mouth. So for us to actually train someone is a lot of labor. And for someone then to go on and not put in a show for a year or two can be very much a problem. And I think it's a concern for some stations. They're actually very selective about who they train. So yeah, community radio does provide a platform for professional broadcasters, journalists, technicians, and managers. And it's part of the work that we do. And it's got good sides and bad sides. Thank you.
Who's next?
Oh. Mettre ça un peu plus à la hauteur. Alors, bonjour tout le monde, encore une fois. Ça me fait plaisir d'être ici ce matin, de participer à ce premier forum de convergence média. Je vais vous parler un peu de mon expérience personnelle. Moi, je suis arrivé à la télévision communautaire en 1983. Je sais, ça trahit un peu mon âge, mais que voulez-vous? À cette époque, c'était les tout débuts de la télévision communautaire et c'était ce qu'on appelle une télé expérimentale. En 1995, un poste de direction s'est ouvert. Alors, j'ai décidé d'appliquer. J'ai obtenu le poste. Alors, j'ai gagné un nouvel emploi et j'ai perdu la moitié du salaire. Mais c'était un choix que je ne regrette pas du tout aujourd'hui, après quelques années de pratique, doit-on dire. On a toujours considéré chez nous comme faisant partie de notre mission que d'encourager les jeunes et moins jeunes, il faut le dire, à joindre nos rangs dans le but de mettre en pratique ce qu'ils ont appris à l'école parce qu'ils veulent en faire un métier, parce qu'ils veulent en faire une carrière. On a des gens chez nous qui viennent pour pratiquer la technique derrière la caméra, mais on a aussi des gens qui veulent apprendre le métier de journaliste, d'animateur. Donc, eux veulent être devant la caméra. On a, je vous dirais en moyenne, bon an, mal an, environ 60 bénévoles par année. Un noyau d'une trentaine qui sont récurrents, qui reviennent d'année en année, mais il y a toujours des nouveaux, des élèves, des étudiants qui nous arrivent parce qu'ils sont à l'université en journalisme ou qui nous arrivent parce qu'ils ont été à une école spécialisée à Jonquière pour apprendre un métier technique, que ce soit caméraman ou autre. Alors, chez nous, on leur permet de mettre en pratique ce qu'ils ont appris. Et je peux vous dire aussi que dans le milieu, c'est quelque chose qui est fort reconnu. Quand quelqu'un envoie son CV dans une entreprise quelconque et qu'il y est mentionné qu'il a travaillé dans une télévision communautaire, c'est un élément très positif. Pourquoi? Parce qu'on sait que dans les télévisions communautaires, les budgets sont très réduits. Dans certains cas, je dirais presque inexistants. Ce qui fait que les gens sont appelés à remplir plusieurs fonctions. Hein, le caméraman ne va pas se contenter d'être derrière sa caméra en se fiant qu'il y a quelqu'un qui tire le fil en arrière de lui. Il n'y a pas de personnel syndiqué. Alors, il faut faire tous les métiers. Alors, quelqu'un qui travaille en télévision communautaire, c'est quelqu'un qui va avoir passé au travers beaucoup de fonctions différentes, ce qui fait que c'est plus enrichissant. Quand il arrive dans le milieu du travail, il dit « Oh, voilà, j'ai l'expérience de montage, j'ai une expérience de caméraman, je peux faire tel ou tel emploi. » Alors, c'est quelque chose qui est reconnu. Il y a quelques années, on a produit une petite vidéo d'une douzaine de minutes où justement, on est allé interviewer des gens qui sont connus, ce qu'on appelle des vedettes dans le métier, mais qui ont tous fait leur début en télévision communautaire. On est allé chercher leurs commentaires et je peux vous dire qu'ils ont été très généreux et ils ont tous apprécier leur séjour en télévision communautaire en disant « c'est grâce à la télévision communautaire que je fais le métier que je fais aujourd'hui ». Et pour nous, c'est enrichissant parce qu'on se dit on doit faire quelque chose de bon puisque ça fonctionne, puisque ces gens-là, ça leur a permis de réaliser leurs rêves. Par contre, il y a un piège. Et il faut faire attention à ce piège. On ne peut pas recruter des bénévoles sur la base qu'on va les amener dans le monde professionnel. Ce n'est pas nous qui faisons ce travail-là, c'est eux. Nous, on permet à leur talent de s'exprimer, on permet d'acquérir de l'expérience, mais on ne va pas inculquer à personne le talent qu'ils n'ont pas. Alors, c'est un danger. On ne peut pas faire la promesse qu'en venant travailler comme bénévole chez nous, les gens vont se ramasser aux professionnels. C'est pas vrai. Il y en a. C'est un peu comme un joueur de hockey. Hein? Les joueurs de hockey, on dit 1 sur 100 000. Il y a peut-être 1 sur 1000 dans notre cas, ou une, parce qu'on a aussi des dames qui ont très, très bien réussi. Si on regarde dans les communautés de vedettes, il y a des noms que du côté francophone, on connaît beaucoup, énormément. Je pense à Julie Schneider, qui a fait de la télévision communautaire. Je pense à Éric Salvaille, qui a fait de la télévision communautaire. Dans les journalistes, il y en a aussi énormément. Alors, tous ces gens-là sont venus une première fois en télé communautaire et ils ont appris à faire le métier. Alors, on se doit, par contre, de les encadrer, de mettre de la rigueur dans leur travail, de les superviser, de les aider et surtout d'être franc. Moi, je ne me gêne pas pour dire à quelqu'un, je pense que tu es à ta place ou je pense que tu n'es pas à ta place. Je vous donne une anecdote rapidement. Je sais qu'on n'a pas beaucoup de temps. À un moment donné, j'ai quelqu'un qui vient et lui, il voulait être régisseur de plateau. Jusque-là, ça va bien. Monsieur, il n'est pas capable de compter à rebours. Il commence à 10, 9, 8, 9, 10. Il repart sur l'autre bord. Impossible pour lui. C'est banal comme problème, mais tu ne peux pas être régisseur de plateau si tu ne peux pas donner un compte à rebours à personne. Là. Ça ne fonctionne pas. Alors, il a fallu qu'on lui trouve autre chose. Mais il ne faut pas se gêner pour leur dire, il faut leur expliquer. Et il faut être franc avec ces gens-là. Mais ça fait partie de notre mission. Je pense que c'est un rôle important qu'on a comme télévision communautaire d'encourager ce genre de personnes qui veulent faire carrière, qui veulent prendre de l'expérience et qui veulent un jour réaliser ce rêve qui est de travailler dans les métiers de la télévision. Et c'est un très beau métier. Merci beaucoup.
I'll go because I kind of fit in this between the community television and local television before we get to gaming and things like that. I had the pleasure in the early days of my career, and again, I don't want to name dates or anything, so you know how old I am, but I worked at a local television station when local was still a word to describe television. You know, when we had the third and fourth channels, third and fourth stations opening up in the bigger cities. Which led to this expansion where the focus was local, and if you wanted to do local advertising, you had to do local programming, which is still a CRTC requirement. At that time, local programming and local advertising was robust. There wasn't a lot of competition for the advertising market, so you could afford to do 10, 15 hours of local non-news programming a week. And so those were the glory days in the 90s, and we did a lot of local programming either in-house, outside of the news department and sports department, which functioned on their own as local. And we also did it with local independent producers. And the beauty of that scenario was we could work with local producers who didn't have an awful lot of track record, but we could do one-off documentaries with them. We could air them and sell them across the country. And these people are now quite large production companies. My experience is based in Vancouver, so we're talking production companies that are now in Vancouver that started 20 years ago producing little local specials or little local documentaries for the local station. As you all know, the local advertising market has really suffered in competition, the national advertising as well. So the conventional broadcasting system is not doing as well as it has been, and local, other than news and sports, is really struggling to get made. So that entry vehicle into the professional producing industry in Canada has pretty much closed down. Then I was, later on in my career, I worked as a community programmer for a cable community station outside of Vancouver, a small station that was not bought up in the Rogers-Shaw swap that happened in the West and the East. And so it played outside of the game for a while. It was a lovely little community station. It had quite a large territory, but a small population. There were 3 small towns. And it was the MacGyver of community channels, if you know what that means. Because everything was sort of, depending on how old the technology was, how you were displaying programming on your system, how were you using tape, were you using DVDs, CDs, whatever. The community program manager was magnificent. He could stick gum on things, and we could do amazing stuff with aging technology. The problem in the community programming was the funding, and always how much staff ratio, how much volunteer ratio, how do you get volunteers to come in and produce the programming. You've got the CRTC requirements about access, and how do you balance all that? We were lucky in that we were based in a high school. So we had our studio in the local high school. There were 3 high schools in the 3 towns, and we got to use those students and put them into a media training program for 10, 11, and 12, so they became our crew. Every week we did local programming. Thursday nights we did 2 shows, 1 live, 1 recorded. They were talk shows. Every month we did a local government show from the towns and then the regional districts, so they came in and did call-in shows. We had a mobile that was stuck together by Band-Aids, but it made it up and down the coast several times. And we would cover local festivals, local dances, and our most popular programming was covering the graduation ceremonies of the 3 high schools. We got a lot of revenue from parents buying CDs of their kids graduating. And that's what we did, but we were known in the community. They knew what our logo was, they knew who we were. They came into the station, a retired community would come in and produce shows, and that was fantastic. But once we sort of started getting caught up in being bought by a bigger company, this started the whole consolidation process of they kind of downsized us a bit. We weren't sure what our budget was anymore, being part of a bigger company. There was no really public accounting. They weren't telling us what our budget was. And so that became sort of some of the problems that are now being encountered on the cable community channel side. You are in the position of having to train volunteers. We fortunately had a captive audience in the school with those kids because that was part of their program. That was part of their graduation requirements, was to work on so many hours, do so many volunteer hours. And a lot of them have since gone off into the professional industry, but more on the technical side. Whereas local television, you worked with independent producers and they had their own companies. These people were trained, as you all, I'm sure, know, as camera people. There was an audio program within the school, so they worked quite extensively in audio. Our MacGyver guy was really good in lighting, so lighting and staging and how to shoot in studio and how to shoot on location with fixed camera positions. These people learned it all. One of the graduates of that program is a really highly paid technical director. I mean, he did the Vancouver Olympics opening ceremony. So these people can come up. A tendency has been, on our experience, it's on the technical side, either as camera people, as audio, as directors, technical directors, less so on the producing and directing side, even though they did direct programs. So that's been my experience in the shift of what the difference is between the local that used to be in public and in conventional television stations, got shifted into the local community channels, same kind of local, and now that's kind of being challenged by this branding that goes on in terms of, you know, whether it's Shaw TV or Rogers TV, this sort of corporatization of community television. And so to me, that's one of the challenges, is how do you maintain your community programming in sort of the face of another agenda going on. And it's also how do you maintain and keep your volunteers. You need a certain staff level to be professionally trained, to work with volunteers and to work in the programming because these people do not have the technical skills to produce it. And it doesn't matter how old your technology is. A camera is a camera is a camera. If you can shoot and you can learn how to edit, you can upgrade as you go along in the process. But those skills are still required in bringing people up into the business so that they can either then go on to work in the commercial broadcasting industry, or they can become independent producers, which is what a lot of our members are, all independent producers, and go that way. So I think there's a role for community television. I grew up in local television and I love it, and without it we miss a representational view of ourselves in our little communities, and knowing that our little local programs and little local stories are being profiled. That's my piece.
So I'm, for those of you who just walked in, I work at ACTRA, so we're the union who represents professional performers in Canada. And so I haven't worked in community television like a lot of people here. We really come from the, I guess, the point of view of representing these performers. And I say, I guess, professional performer because that's what we often talk about when we talk about who we represent, but also to hark back to what Ken said in terms of professionals and amateurs working together. However, even if a lot of our members, like any union, will have to go through some type of apprenticeship and then eventually become members of it, so are considered professional performers, a lot of them are still consider themselves as starting out and still have a need to be seen and get their start to a certain extent. So we get a lot of questions from them and concerns in terms of being seen and not just, I guess, working on bigger productions and background roles. And a lot of that is with, I think there's a huge opportunity there in community television, and we've seen it in the past where a lot of well-known performers have gotten their start in community television. The issue that we see nowadays is, so a lot of our performers more and more are, in order to be part of the production, I guess, system, will work a lot in low-budget productions and be part of the whole, I guess, they're not just in front of the camera anymore, but they're participating at many different levels in order to have their stories told and be part of these productions. The issue that they're having is finding a home for all these productions and for what they want to create and what want to be part of. And when I talk to people who are in the production in community television, what I see a lot is, first of all, there's an issue in financing, but then a lot, they may be a bit related to that, but also what a lot of community television and media are producing is more news or life-based programming, which is obviously not necessarily what our performers can participate in. So it's, on one hand, finding a home for what they have, on the other, being able to participate in community television. So some of the issues that in terms of challenges that we're looking at from our perspective is both in terms of access, but also then in terms of financing, having more money in community TV for programming and not just fact-based or news-type productions. So these are, I guess, the perspectives for our members, and also in terms of the challenges that we hear from them and want to work on in the future. And that's my short summary, and then we can go on to discussion.
Hi, my name is Jim McGinley. Oh, the computer's just restarting. This is bonus. I'm part of the Toronto Game Jam, which is quite unlike the community initiatives that are talked about here. What this is in Toronto, and back in 2006, you have a lot of people who have game-making skills, be they artists, programmers, audio, kind of the gamut, and they're looking for an outlet to basically make games. So these are people who aren't employed in the industry. They're not working at Ubisoft, but they do have talent, and they're like, well, I want to get together and make a game. So all we did was organize, it's all volunteer, just to organize what we call a game jam, to get people together for a weekend to come and build games. So we've done this every year for 10 years. Last May we had 450 people come out to make games for a weekend, and this is what they do for fun. Like this is it. So basically everybody that attends is a community member. Like that's what they do. And then they produce their games and we post them, you can download and play them. So basically, I just want to show some slides because, again, for me, has anyone heard of a game jam? Yeah, okay, that's good. Because I used to, back 2006, it was just considered a very strange thing. And so at least now it's more of a normal thing. We're probably one of the older jams around, and we're certainly one of the larger ones. So while we don't get any government funding, we do indirectly because one of the local schools, Ryerson, they host it. And if they didn't host it, we couldn't hold it. And they do that for free. So indirectly, we receive some funding. And then the members that attend, or the people that attend, it's just free. They tend to come back and sponsor us. So we've been kind of lucky to get this far. So the question, and the reason when I was contacted to be part of this is, well, is there could we do more with funding? Absolutely. Like we have to cut people out right now. We turn away about 200 people now. So we can't really grow because then that would mean moving out of Ryerson, and then that would mean we'd have to pay for our conference center, which blows our minds. So the question is there any, what's the justification behind funding something like a game jam? And that's what I'm here for. And just to go through it a little bit, people from the game jams, that doesn't happen a lot. It's kind of like you mentioned. It's, that hockey player that kind of comes out. But we do have some people who go out and form studios. So our biggest success story is a 4-person team came together one weekend, did this 2006, 2007. Then they got together and built an iPhone game called Mega Jump, and it got something like 40 million downloads. Those aren't all paid, but enough were paid to basically have them form a studio. Then they made Mega Run, which was, I think it's had 20 million downloads. And that's like on your iPhone, 20 million people across the world have downloaded this game and played it. And then they have like little in-app purchases. You might buy a little hat or buy a new character, and that's their funding model. So they've gone off, and they've now, I think it's about a 10-person studio now. There's another company called Juicy Beast. I think that's Ottawa-based. There used a game called Toto Temple on the Wii U. I think they're also on Steam. I don't quite know how successful they've been, but you see people come out to the jams, and if they're like, hey, this actually works for us in a weekend, imagine what we can do in a few months. That's kind of the mentality that drives it. The second thing I would say is that aside from people forming studios, right now it's quite, I don't know how long this will last, but it's quite possible that if you have a good idea and you have the ability, by yourself you can go and release a game, put it up on the iPhone, put it up on Steam, put it up Xbox. Like Microsoft and Sony are courting indie developers to kind of like supplement their AAA content. So there's like some great examples. There's a game called Starseed Pilgrim, which is a very, if you're familiar with platformers, you plant seeds and platforms grow. So I'm not saying that the jam is the reason he's made that game, but he's been attending the jam probably for 6 years. And so to have the motivation there to meet people and see, you know what, I can actually do this by myself. That's kind of what the jam is doing for people who you just see them branch away and they're like, ordinarily they might not consider trying to do that. So you have some people going after school, they're like, you know what, I'm not going to, after I graduate, I'm not going to rush out and try to get a game in the AAA game industry. I'm going to try doing this by myself. So you have some people who, like, for the last few years have been making a living. Also, at the jam, this is rare, but some of the games created at the jam actually go on to sell by themselves. Now, again, a 3-day game jam game isn't very good, but they'll polish it. Because at the jam, if your fellow developers like the game, then what happens is you kind of know it's something special. So you tend to work on it and then release it and see what happens. The biggest example we have is a game called Super Time Force. So the idea was, imagine you're running around shooting, killing a bunch of things, but then you die. You reverse time, then you run with a copy of your previous self. So now there's 2 of you. Your previous self trying to take care of somebody, and then your new person, you're working with yourself to do this. And then you die again. Now there's 3 of you. So finally, that boss monster, what might have been hard to kill, there's eventually going to be 10 of you. And they did this at the jam, just as a prototype. Spent, I think, 2 years or 3 years perfecting it, and released it. It's an amazing game. And a couple other examples is this crazy game called Mount Your Friends. I can't really show it here. It's not quite rude, but it's not quite not. But the idea was you have these guys that are hard to control, and you stack them. And you try to, so what happens is I stack my guy, you stack your guy, and we keep trying to stack them and until someone can't, and then there's a loser. So what's happened is in the climate of today with YouTube, if you've heard of Let's Plays, people will go and play your game, and they'll record themselves playing it. It turns out that it's actually very fun to have you and a friend play this game. It's more fun to actually watch people play the game than in some cases to play the game. So if you go to YouTube and you type in Mount Your Friends, there's probably like 100 videos of people playing this game, and you hear them laughing because it's silly to look at. But as a result, this kind of new climate we're in, you have people at the jam. It doesn't happen a lot, but like it happens where the game they make goes on to basically justify itself. So those are sort of like the three big reasons why I think maybe something like game jams might, if there was more funding involved, it means there could be more people coming, so there's more instances of this happening. That's sort of what I feel anyways. And then sort of the last thing, and last couple points would just be, do people get hired because of attending game jams? Yes. I think what's happening now is you're starting to see there's so many game jams. Toronto has, we have ours, but there's a bunch of them throughout the world, that now if you're an employer in the larger game industry that's making like Battlefield or Assassin's Creed, when they look at your resume, if they see you haven't participated in a game jam, they're like, okay, well, what's your experience? That's your degree still counts, work still counts, but they're like, if they don't see you participated in a game jam, they're like, well, is this person serious? Are they even passionate? Versus someone who's like got the skills and they're also spending a weekend. When I say a weekend, like you're coming into a classroom, it's not like a LAN party where you're playing games. You're sitting in a computer it's 3 days. It's quiet. It's like a library, building a game, because that's what it takes. So again, I think that employers more and more do look for that. Certainly in Toronto, the smaller studios, they are kind of one of the questions they'll ask you, because I was part of a smaller studio. They'll say, well, have you attended a game jam? And if you haven't, it's kind of weird, because if you not want to make games, why wouldn't you do this? And I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone here on the panel for now. I'll just give you a little bit of background myself. When I started at a community radio station when I was 15, coming out of school. And for me, the question was radio, TV broadcasting, or accounting. And I decided I don't like money in general, so not making it either. So I decided radio and TV was the way to go. And I went through a program at College 3 years around radio and television broadcasting, and I was the only one going into it that had any background or knowledge and experience really on the community side of things, and it ended up being that I'm the only one coming out of it that actually stayed in the sector. And I think throughout the entire discussion of the 3 years that I was there, I think the only thing that popped up, I think once or twice, the word community broadcast actually popped up. So there's a bit of a discussion and difference between people going into these educational sections and learning and coming out as professionals, or coming out as someone who does produce in that sense as well. So, and I see Chris here works at one of the local ones, and a lot more progressive than some of the other groups as well. But my question comes back to the panel here to start with is, do you feel as though there's a bias or a difference between someone who has come out of an educational sector that has the word professional built around it, and does that limit the ability of members or others within your organizations to actually move into a realm where they can make this as a full-time living? Anybody want to step up?
Because I've worked on on the conventional over-the-air television side as well as the community television side. If you talk to anybody in conventional television about community television, they really don't know what you're talking about unless they've come up through a program. Even at BCIT, usually we would look to hire people that had some kind of 2-year broadcast program, and BCIT is the technical college in Vancouver that they would come out of. So you wouldn't hire anybody coming into either our operations side in particular unless they had something like a BCIT 2-year certification. And if they'd worked in community television, you know, I think it was sort of the Wayne's World problem. They thought that, you know, you were doing stuff that really wasn't very professional. It was really more fun. And as a training program, it wasn't necessarily recognized. Whereas when you work more either on the educational side, when we start talking about community radio, campus radio, community television, I think there's a recognition within that group. And then again, it depends on the kind of programs that you work on. If you can, because our students had 3 years of training, they could demonstrate that they knew how to operate a camera, that they knew how to shoot, they knew how to edit, they knew how to light, they knew the lingo. But then again, there was one student of mine that went on into the Vancouver industry, the production industry, and so she was working as a PA on film and television projects that were professional. And it was because of her experience learning how to do stuff in community radio that she got to meet some of the people in Vancouver who were professionals, and so they got her a job. But again, you're starting to get into the union side of things, which can be a bit of a challenge to get into as well. So from my experience, the crossover is really tough. If you're in one professional track that's a BCIT, conventional commercial television, versus sort of more an academic or a community-based, policy-based kind of a track, I didn't see a lot of crossover.
Thank you. I think for our members, there's it's any experience is good experience, really. And in fact, I think some of the very often we'll talk about when we introduce our lower budget agreements that we have that our members can work on. One of the reasonings behind these low budget agreements is we talk about better work opportunities for our members, just because of sometimes it's more significant roles, or they can be more in front of the camera. It won't necessarily always be build cast, that type of thing. And so within these low budget agreements that our members participate in, they've created their own community of, you look at all the different cities and all these little lower budget type productions, and the way they all know each other. When we organized some short film festivals with ACTRA, and then all the people who always participate in these short film festivals, they all know each other. And so these are all opportunities where they get to I guess, create these stories together, but then also have that time in front of the camera that they need in terms of gaining experience. So I think any training ground to that effect will be incredibly positive in terms of moving towards bigger budget type productions. I don't know if that answered your question.
Je voudrais peut-être juste compléter parce que la situation au Québec, elle est différente de ce qui se passe ailleurs au Canada. Il existe actuellement dans la province plus d'une quarantaine de télévisions communautaires autonomes. Alors évidemment que rares sont les professionnels qui ne sont pas passés par une télévision communautaire. Et c'est la complémentarité de ces deux situations, le communautaire et le professionnel, qui fait que quelqu'un atteint un meilleur background, on va utiliser le mot. Pourquoi? Parce que quand on sort de l'université, oui, on a appris beaucoup, on a pratiqué certaines choses, mais jamais, jamais autant qu'en télévision communautaire. Ils n'ont pas tout le temps nécessaire. Chacun effleure un peu les différents domaines, mais ne touche pas en profondeur comme on peut le faire dans le cas d'une télévision communautaire. Et dans le monde du communautaire, il y a un mot d'ordre. Chez nous, c'est comme ça. La pauvreté rend ingénieux. Alors, il faut arriver à faire des choses extraordinaires avec pas beaucoup de budget. Et ça, c'est un atout quand vous arrivez ailleurs. Alors, c'est sûr que être issu du monde communautaire, c'est pas négatif, c'est très positif. Alors, il y a beaucoup plus d'échanges entre le communautaire et le professionnel, je dirais, au Québec, qu'on peut en voir dans le reste du Canada, d'après ce que j'entends en tout cas.
Ken, Jim?
Oh, well, our industry is still so new that the idea of kind of a professional game developer, it does, I mean, you do have the university background, the academic background, but it's almost always about the portfolio. They're like, well, what have you built? So basically, I would say that there's no, like the community experience, any experience helps. It's the same, I think the same as you, Anna, it's just any experience.
I think also what's made it interesting is going on the internet. You know, these kids are now, you know, I haven't been in community television for, I guess, about 5 years, so it shows you the limit of my experience. But these kids are trained. You know, the high school kids that go through the program are trained and can easily post their stuff and develop their own YouTube channels and have all the skills necessary to go forward themselves with that kind of training. So from that perspective, I think it's fantastic. But to actually have a career in community television is probably really hard because of the money factor. You know, there's a cap on salaries, there's a cap on budgets, there's a cap on how many employees you can have. So the ability to have a long-term career in it can be challenging if that's the way you want to go. I also, one of the interesting things, and it's going to come up, and it's probably not the place to say it, but when you are looking at the internet, one of the problems that we faced was that we had a community channel. It was available on cable, on our local cable channel. But there were a lot of people who didn't get the cable channel, and they wanted us to put stuff online. And the commercial reality was that the community channel was one of the selling points of the cable company, and so they wouldn't put these programs online because that would dilute the incentive for people to become cable customers. The sad part of that was that there were some people in our territory that could not access cable no matter what. They would have had to have got it by satellite because there were a lot of remote areas. So to me, that's an interesting conundrum in going forward about multi-platforming community channels. You know, how do you clear the rights outside of your little territory, etc. We covered a writers' festival, which was one of our best programs, in that the writers were from all across the country. We would just put up a camera and we would record them and they would read from their books and everything. And there wasn't a copyright issue because the writers would sign waivers because for them, any publicity surrounding their books, they were happy to have, but it was also not going to leave that territory. It wasn't going to go on national television. It wasn't going to go on national radio. It wasn't going to go anywhere outside of that where their agents might have been antsy about, you know, and the publishers might have been concerned. So that's also, there's a whole rights issue and exploitation issue about multi-platforming community product that I think is an interesting complication. Thank you.
Sorry, if I can add to that, and we're really going beyond the question here, but in terms of access, I think that's a really interesting question in terms of going forward because so few people now get cable, and there are so many different types of platforms, and so you can understand from one perspective that the broadcaster wanting to, that how it's attractive, and then there's definitely a lot of policy and rights issues, but then there's also just a basic question of access. And so these are people who are making products. I was talking to a producer in Montreal just recently, and he's working with some of our members for a community TV program, and he was just talking about how one of his biggest frustrations is how no one can see it because it's on a specialty cable, and he really caters to a demographic that I guess the broadcaster would want to cater to, but that demographic doesn't have cable anymore. They don't even have a TV. Most of these people only have computers. He himself, as a producer, didn't have a television. It just goes to show. And so there's, I think, the question of access and how we can move forward in terms of having all these things being able to be seen, all these efforts being, I guess, more fruitful. And then also, I think the more it's seen, the more people want to make more. And then I think it's, so I think the access is one of the bigger questions that we're going to have to address.
And I think access is one of the larger topics that will come up throughout the next 3 days here, so we'll continue on with those areas there. Does anybody have any questions, either specifically for the panelists or in general? Still got about 20 minutes or so. If not, I can come up with a couple more.
I have like, I haven't formulated my question very well, so pardon that. I guess because I come from a campus television station, and we're talking about like whether they're trained in, people are trained in schools and going into careers, or trained in community stations. How can community differentiate themselves from those programs and encourage people to get involved on the community level? And not that school isn't necessarily valuable, but what that community experience can bring them, either in addition or on its own. Does that make sense? I'm trying to...
Anyone like to speak to that?
Not that I love to hear the sound of my own voice, but it's starting to seem that way. This is what I find really interesting, because I've always been an advocate of local programming. You know, I've always grown up with it, and I worked at a local TV station when I was in high school, and summer jobs and stuff, and it was the cooking shows and everything else that then subsequently got sort of foisted onto community television because commercial stations got more advanced in what they were doing and finding ways. The monetary issue is interesting to me on the local side, because first, you know, they do it because they've got lots of money and they can afford to do all these colorful programming, whether, you know, my VP of programming would go, it gets hash marks in the ratings. Why are we doing this? Well, that was kind of what you said you were going to do. But that fell away on the conventional side. On the community television side, coming up through the ranks and doing these kind of local shows was fantastic. But they're starting to get into, they're getting consolidated and commercialized as well. So there is a trajectory within something like a Rogers TV in Toronto where there is a certain degree of professionalism, but there's a tendency to not do the colorful local stuff as much anymore, and train the volunteers and keep the staff that can do that kind of programming. So there's this conflict, this dichotomy between sort of the initial mandate of community television and more this local television initiative, which is more a commercial style of local programming versus community programming. I think if you come in on the community side and you're lucky enough to live in a bigger metropolitan area, you can come up through the ranks and get good training that will be recognized across both the commercial and the community television side. And you can work up in the bigger companies that have consolidated, have a higher degree of branding and marketing within their community channel, Shaw TV, Rogers TV, kind of local community channels. And to me, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because what we're missing is the opportunity for people to start, to get into the business, to get trained. And those people that have passion, that used to go to your local television station and go, I want to make a 1-hour documentary because I want to profile the shipbuilding industry here just down the street. You can't do that anymore on conventional television. They don't care. There's no money for it. There's no interest in it. There's no advertising revenue. So the documentary industry, particularly in Eastern Canada, in English Canada, which is all I can talk about, is really difficult. It's that much harder for producers to get into the business, to be able to make those starter programs. So if conventional television is going to give up on local stations, then it does kind of fall on community television to become more of a hybrid, to become both community access but funded and trained properly, that they can do work with community groups rather than putting all the onus on community groups. If you don't have the people to produce this, we're not going to give you the space, but also provide an up-ramping of, okay, maybe you've come from this side, but now you can go off and produce and direct, and we'll give you a camera crew. Do a 1-hour documentary. Do something that you can take to festivals. Start working your way up the system of being an independent producer, as opposed to a technician that's working your way up on the technical side. So it's kind of a very roundabout personal hobby horse issue of mine, but I mean, you have to start somewhere. You have to know what kind of, whether you want to come up on the sort of the on-screen talent, behind the camera talent, or the producing talent, like where do you want to go? And then you can find a route, but I think it's also important for conferences like this to say, okay, look, if we're not having local television, if the CRTC is going to let local television stations not have to do anything beside news and sports, then they've got to find a way to make the community channel pick up the slack on the local side, properly funded, properly structured, and also not shove all the local community groups out the door because they want to raise the, they want to raise their profile and their branding and their sponsorship opportunities to generate cash flow on the other side.
Thank you. Just for the next, when we have questions here, if you could stand and just say a little bit your name and where you're from. That way we have a better understanding of where the question's coming from as well.
Okay, so hello, I'm Barbara. I've come a long way from Vienna, Austria. And my question is concerning the idea of training, because you were only talking about training on the job till now. Is there something like a workshop program for the volunteers, or even some workshops the stations are offering as a kind of an access possibility for new volunteers?
Si j'ai bien compris la question, on a, mais encore là, ça reste, comme je le disais tantôt, il y a une quarantaine de télévisions communautaires autonomes dans la province de Québec. Toutes ces télés-là n'ont pas les mêmes ressources, n'ont pas les mêmes moyens. Je parle pour chez nous, oui, on a des programmes de formation. Nous, on travaille en jumelage. Alors, on prend toujours un exemple. On prend un caméraman. Le caméraman a plusieurs années d'expérience avec nous. Des fois, c'est un retraité. J'ai des retraités de Radio-Canada, j'ai des retraités de Télémétropole qui est maintenant devenu TVA. Alors, ces gens-là travaillent avec un nouveau, donc en jumelage, et donnent la formation. Donc, quand le caméraman d'expérience nous dit le jeune y est prêt, je dis le jeune, mais ça peut être un autre retraité aussi qui n'a aucune expérience en caméra. Là, on peut le laisser aller tout seul, parfait, on le met sur une caméra, go, puis amuse-toi. Je dis toujours que la grosse différence entre une télé communautaire puis une télé professionnelle, chez nous, on a le droit à l'erreur. Tu ne seras pas mis dehors parce que tu t'es trompé. Si tu te trompes 3 fois, on va se parler, mais il reste que tu as droit à l'erreur. Donc, une grosse différence. Alors, ça fait partie du programme d'entraînement. On a des subventions qui nous proviennent de notre fédération pour aider à la formation également. Je le disais tantôt, c'est en complémentarité. On n'est pas une école. On est là pour aider, pour continuer la formation, pour parfaire, pour aider à pratiquer le métier. Mais il y a des écoles spécialisées qui font ce travail-là. Je ne sais pas si ça répond à votre question.
I just wanted to add a short comment to the training, because our situation is a little bit different than what other stations may be facing. In our particular instance, many of our volunteers are professionals in their field. Quite simply, our technical director is the head of the Linux Club. He runs a technical organization. He provides service. Our programming director is a journalism instructor. He teaches journalism. Our spoken word director is, again, an instructor at the university. Where we do have to have training, and we did actually need to get training, is for the programmers on how to do a show. Like basically, that's where the tire hits the pavement for the radio station. And a programmer would come, they want to do a show, and again, in most of the instances, many of our programmers were experienced. They already knew how to do shows. They were DJs, or in some instances, they were programmers for other community radio stations. We were funded to develop our training manuals. We had received an adequate amount of money to pay somebody to sit down, write it all out for us, make a nice little training package, and we could basically hand that over to a person, and it covers basically all the elements of how to do a show. So in our particular instance, our training was paid for, and we had those manuals made up, and we can hand them out. So it really was quite easy for us.
For us, for our members, training is a huge aspect of what we try and create for them. Part of what we try to do for our members is create a community of members. And so we have every single branch across the country of ACTRA will have different members conferences and different events that they organize. And these members conferences very often will have workshops or training opportunities. And these very often will be put together by older members or more experienced members, and for other people to profit from their experience. And then also the different branches will put together workshops outside of this. And in Montreal, we put one together for video games, and we got funding from Emploi Québec, from the government, in order to put that together. Because studios are, especially video game studios, are extremely expensive to run. And so putting this together for our members to be able to train with the experience of other members who have been in the business longer. And for the video game one, for example, all of our teachers, I guess, for the workshop are members of the union as well. And but another aspect of it is we have agreements with all of the communication schools, and then with those agreements we allow our members to work on any student production from those different departments, communication departments and film departments. And so that way it's both people who are students who are making productions who get to work with our members and benefit from that, and then our members as well who get to benefit from working on these different productions. So it's really them working together. So.
Jim, did you have anything, or not really? Okay.
Well, I guess one small thing. It's always it's so different. Yeah. Well, I don't know if this would work anywhere else, but the one thing the internet does a very good job of is documenting Windows APIs, game programming APIs. Like if you wanted to build a game right now, you're like, oh, I want to build a game. The information doesn't stop. There's people out there who will show you, here, I'm going to open up this program, open it up with me, and they'll build these videos for free, put them up there. So it's just a matter of time. If you want to put the time in, you can learn how to build a video game like from scratch. And if you're like, well, I'm interested in the most obscure language, I like this really obscure one, someone's got a video out there, the document's already written. So basically that's why the jam works, because we just give you an excuse to say, I'm going away for a weekend, and if you want to, people learn things from scratch. So you have artists who will pick up like a 3D studio program, and I mean at an amateur level, don't get me wrong, they're not it's not professional, but it's amazing the amount of stuff, at least in the computer world, that people will post for game development. It's everything from the amateur level to, you've built a Star Wars ship, of course you know how to do that, but are you interested in lighting it just right like this movie? And then someone will be like, this is how you do it, and they'll have a 2-hour video just on that. So again, for my area, it's crazy what you can do if you have time.
I think we have time for one more question. Did you?
My name is Karen Wersig, and I've just left the Cactus Board, which is the community TV board, but I also work for a union that represents people who work in broadcasting and journalists and stuff. And we've been talking about sort of the professional versus community sectors and how they interact, but one of the things that's come the professional sector is shrinking. There are fewer and fewer opportunities, and the schools, I think, are all running into this, right? That the radio, television, art schools are like, where are people going to work for money? It's a real problem, right? There's less and less professional opportunities for people. But that speaks, I think, to the overall, and I think it's what Susan was saying about the shrinkage in general in our broadcasting system. It's not just the commercial side, by the way. The public sector's also really shrunk. And that's not just a problem for people getting jobs. It's a problem for public expression, for the opportunity. And so back to, I think, Taylor's question about how you bring people in, one of the ways I think is we have to reinvent a system for ourselves, not just on television and on radio, but I think in all the platforms. And community media is probably the only way that's going to happen. Like, we actually, as citizens and as people who want to tell stories and entertain each other, either with gaming or with nonfiction kind of stories, and share information. Like, we ourselves have to reinvent the system, because certainly the Rogers, Shaws, and Bells of the world will not do that, and the CRTC, unless we really push them, will not let it happen. So I think, to me, that is maybe how we can draw people in, is people who have that interest in self and public expression really have to use whatever poor infrastructure is there in English Canada and use whatever infrastructure exists in Quebec to reinvent the system for ourselves. So I don't know if that sounds right to you guys. I mean, the gaming people, you've just done it yourselves on shoestring budgets, but it's kind of inspiring, actually.
I think we're actually very close to time, and it was a very strong statement that you made there, and I would agree with myself. Being that we oversee a network of individuals, a study's about to be released from the radio side of things that shows there's approximately 15,000 community volunteers within campus and community radio across the country, and about 700 staff. And the fact that I was recently at the Ontario Association of Broadcasters last week, and there's a lot of question around where are the voices coming, where are these people coming from, and they're looking towards finding individuals that are coming out of the schools who are already developed but have unique personalities, have different stories to say, but they're not looking anywhere into the community side of things. And I think there is less and less opportunity on the commercial side of things and more opportunity on the community side of things. And I think you're seeing it in general with growth. I mean, where Ken is involved with, he works in a tiny little island, and they're one member that's very similar to ours that continue to grow, and we're adding 5% new stations every year on the community radio side of things because there is that need for that expression and that ability. So I think with that time, sorry to not sort of let the group field the question there, but we're out of time for now. So 11 o'clock, there's a 15-minute break, and then there's the next set of topics happening. So I want to thank the panel very much for speaking and talking about their involvement. And I want to thank you guys for participants for coming up with some great questions. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the day and continue to learn. Thank you.